we're going to go to the first program with Professor Liliana Bove from University of Melbourne and Rachel as the moderator. So Rachel, the screen is yours.
Thank you. And I just wanted to introduce Professor Liliana Bove here at the front. I do have a biography. I do know Liliana quite well, but I am going to read it just so that I give total justice to all of the things that Liliana has achieved over the many years. So Liliana Bove is a Professor of Marketing at the University of Melbourne, Australia. Specialising in services marketing, she has a keen interest in the interactions between customers, organisational frontline, and how this affects experiences and wellbeing. Receiving multiple national and international awards for her research, Liliana has published in a range of leading international journals, such as the Journal of Marketing, which is like our best in marketing, International Journal of Research in Marketing, Journal of Service Research, Journal of Retailing and Social Science and Medicine. She has also been recognised for exceptional research training performance in the Faculty of Business and Economics, and she's a consistent high performer in teaching and learning across student cohorts. Prior to her academic career, Liliana held various scientific marketing and management roles in the chemical, airline and health industries. She took a year's leave from the university and joined the Australian Red Cross Blood Service to spearhead their donor and community research. Liliana is a distinguished member of the Australian and New Zealand Marketing Academy. She's current area editor for Psychology and Marketing and associate editor of Academy of Marketing Science Review, which is a leading journal focused exclusively on conceptual contributions in all marketing subdisciplines. So we're very lucky to have Liliana here today to be speaking, and her topic today is what is a theoretical contribution by the business and social sciences field, which I know will be of interest to many of you here today. So let's welcome Professor Bove. Thank you.
Thanks for the very warm welcome and fantastic weather. I haven't been to Canberra for many, many years, so it's great to be here. Now, I understand that there's faculty as well as PhD students here, but let me just direct to the PhD students. Why do you think we're focusing on this topic? Why theoretical contribution? Do you think it's tough to write? Yes, yeah, okay. So if you've been through the journal process, you indeed know that this is the most challenging things to conceptualize. And in fact, as a journal editor, what we tend to do is read that abstract, read that introduction, and look at what is the conceptual or theoretical contribution and make our decision there, okay? Does it add to knowledge? How does it add to knowledge? And increasingly, this is important, isn't it? Because now every single university has the same goals, right? Goalposts to kick to. It's no longer, oh, the G8s have this list of journals and the non-G8s, they have different targets. It doesn't work that way. We've all got the same target. So we're all competing for the same journals. And what you need to do is get through that DES reject process. At least you need that review. And so let's try and mitigate the risks of having that DES reject by really concentrating on your theoretical contribution and how you can articulate that. And that is the focus of today's 1 hour seminar, okay? All right, so we have to begin with understanding. And by the way, we've got some beautiful handouts here in terms of colouring. So please take one as well as your templates. So that saves you from writing notes. So you can write notes on top of that. So principle theory, what is this, right? It's a set of principles offered to explain our phenomena. So all of us have a focal conceptual identity or entity that we're focused on, our phenomena. Okay, so what is governing this phenomenon? Now, data is not theory, right? Data is a pattern of your phenomenon, right? A pattern of what empirical pattern? Whereas theory or conceptualization explains why this pattern occurs. The same as past findings. We can't just write a hypothesis based on past findings. We've got to have the why these constructs or variables are correlated in some way. Okay, how do we explain the pattern of results? So where do we begin? Now, we need a positioning. We need to justify why we're doing the research to begin with. Okay, so what is the problem we're trying to resolve? What is the gap in knowledge that we are trying to address? Are there conflicting findings? Okay, give some motivation behind your research. The fact that it may be interesting is not enough. Okay, what are the implications of finding out the answers? So, a useful place is to focus on your conceptual entity, your phenomenon. What is it? How is it defined? You won't believe the amount of journal articles I review that have the phenomenon and forget to define it, or adopt a definition without clearly looking at whether it has face validity or justifying why they've adopted a particular definition and not another. So it's really important that if you have key concepts, that you define them very early in your manuscript. A good way to start, and I don't think you should underestimate this, is begin with a literature table. And you have to be quite, I guess, clever about how you're going to present that literature table. So, because you want to display why your research is needed. So you want the literature table to show where the gap is in knowledge, or alternatively, where there's conflicting findings. Why? Again, it goes back to why your research is needed. So this is your tangible evidence. Now, a lot of people just, they have a literature table, but all they do is list the authors, list the concept, list the consequences, maybe the moderators, but it doesn't actually support why their research is needed. All right? So be very clever about how you justify, like sit with your literature for a while and justify why you've included particular, say, you may have an exhaustive list, but if it's been around for a while, your conceptual entity of interest or your phenomenon, then justify how you've selected your sample of literature that you're reviewing. So it could be, for example, in our case, the top 10 marketing journals, so whatever your discipline is. But the reason why I wanted to show this particular table, the key conceptual entity here is customer participation. And as you can see, what they've done is listed the literature in alphabetical order. And it might seem, a lot on this literature table, but it's actually cleverly done. Because what they want to show, first of all, is whether or not customer participation in these studies has been a dependent variable or an independent variable. Okay. And then also in terms of what are the outcomes, okay, what it has been known at, or because sometimes people call it, it's the same concept, but people have used different terminology for the same concept. So what is that terminology? I'll come back to this at the end, but you can see here some moderating variables, how it's been operationalized, customer participation, but the key column is this column here. Now, this column here shows you the effect or consequences of customer participation, okay? And you can see here that it has a positive, negative, or non-significant effect. What do you think's going on there? What is the author trying to show?
Commonalities among results.
Okay, so we can make one conclusion that in most cases, customer participation, you're right, leads to positive consequences. But how can we explain the negative or the non-significant? How can we explain that? Can you make a guess? Context, yeah.
Independent factors, what we are considering, like
Independent.
variables that we are considering.
The moderator.
Yeah.
Moderators. Okay, so there might be a different way that you can approach this, but you're setting up your research now to say, hey, something's going on here. All right, we've got conflicting findings. Let me give you a solution. And I'll come back to that solution. Yes.
In fact, it's coming with the agreement and disagreement in the past literature, and you can make a conclusive claim. There is no agreement among the scholars. So we are going to propose something new.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I mean by setting up your study to show that it's needed. And here's a clever way of using your literature table to do so. Okay. So what I'm suggesting is sit with your literature and think, how can I present this so that the gap or the motivation becomes clear and justifiable for me, right? Rather than just listing the literature. Okay, good. I'll come back to this, but you can see it's quite a dense table, but serves its part. Okay, we see this all the time. What's wrong with this statement? Have you used it before? Have you used it before? All right. The relationship or the association between X and Y has never been tested before.
So what?
So what? Correct. Okay. Why do you think there's a problem with this statement?
It wasn't important, maybe that's why.
Exactly. Not important, intuitive, empirically already validated, intuitive or not important is the main reasons. Right? So try and avoid these sort of statements. You can say, I'm the first, all right, but avoid these sort of statements. They are really weak justifications compared to what I showed you just previously. Okay. So given that conceptual contributions or theoretical contributions are key to whether or not our journal article is going to survive that reject process, what are the contributions you can make? And what I've done is differentiated 6 different types of contributions, all right? But understand that these are not discrete and that you may adopt multiples of these, all right? So you don't have to just focus in on one, adopt multiple. So let's have an understanding of what these contributions can be. Perhaps the one that we see a lot of, particularly now that there's software that enables us to do this more easily, is the synthesis approach. And this is where you're summarizing or integrating. You would have a theoretical framework, particularly if your phenomenon is across disciplines. And so this is a nice way of summarizing what's known about that phenomenon. So it's a nice go-to paper, so that if I want to know everything about that phenomenon, I can go to your paper, cite your paper. And what's key here is your future research, right? So what you tend to do is you do take stock of what's known and what's not known about that phenomenon. Let me just give you some examples. So, for example, consumer ethics research, reviews, synthesis, and suggestions for the future. So what is key here when you do a synthesis is the gaps. What you're trying to do is identify the gaps of knowledge that will inform others' research in that particular phenomenon. Okay, so what's key here is that you do have a substantial future research agenda. That is a natural outcome of your synthesis of that literature. So here's a nice, beautiful example. So having some sort of theoretical framework is key, because it simplifies the knowledge on that phenomenon. So the key phenomenon here is electronic word of mouth. So a nice little framework, it's just a 2x2 framework, is when we have a message, you have a sender of the message and you have a receiver. So this is just a 2x2 in terms of antecedents and consequences for the sender and the receiver. So it's just a nice, clever way of synthesizing the literature. But as you can see, what's key about it is the research questions that emanate from your synthesis that is still unanswered. Okay? So synthesis can be a theoretical contribution. The next one is building theory. Now, the qualitative researchers are really good at this, okay? An inductive approach to build theory. We take Russell Belk's, for example, the use of possessions as an extension of yourself, right? They become key papers that people cite about consumption as reflections of your identity. So what we're doing here basically is we can introduce a new conceptual entity like showrooming or web rooming, or something that you see a phenomenon, someone behaving a particular way that's never been before. So you can build theory, or you can reconceptualize an existing conceptualized entity. So I just want to give you an example. This is an old paper, but avatars, for example, they were only used in games. They were only used in entertainment contexts. All right, but now, what about if we use avatars in a shopping context? That's what we know about whether or not an avatar is attractive, okay? Is that going to help me buy more? Or does it really depend on concepts such as how involved I am in that purchase decision, or and therefore expertise or knowledge of that avatar and attractiveness becomes less important? Okay, so here's an example of theory development. This is a common one. Who does process models here? So you're looking, okay, so you're looking at antecedents and consequences, okay, of again, your central phenomenon, your key conceptual entity. So you're trying to look at the nomological network surrounding your entity, okay? And what's key here is that the relationships that you propose through propositions if it's a conceptual paper, or hypotheses, if you're going to collect empirical data. They need to be novel, okay? And they need to be underpinned by some theory, right? Some logic, some principle. So this is key, that it's a novel connection, not something that's so intuitive or has been done before. Okay, so here's an example of that. This is just about building effective online marketplaces and looking at institutional structures. So you can see that indeed these relationships in terms of building effective online marketplaces was not investigated previously. So it's quite a unique and novel presentation of associations that lead to trust and reduction of risk. So I think we're all quite familiar of this approach. Theory adaptation. What does this mean? This means that we look at a particular theory or a conceptual entity again, and we look at it in a different scenario, okay? And I guess the best way of showing you this one is organisational citizenship behaviour. Are you familiar with that? Okay, so employees in organisations doing stuff that's discretionary, that doesn't get rewarded, but is important for the effective functioning of the organisation. Okay, so people that organise Christmas parties or social get-togethers, or people that help or mentor, but don't get recognition for it, or just do it because they want to be helpful to the individual. Okay, so here's a concept: organisational citizenship behaviour. Indeed, we see these sort of behaviours by customers in organisations. And indeed, even though it's exactly the same sort of conceptual entity, it has different drivers and consequences when it comes from customers. All right, so here's an example of adapting a concept to a completely different context. And indeed, what happens is that you have different drivers and consequences. Theory qualifier. What do you think that hints at? Pardon? Mechanisms, great. All right. So why does my conceptual entity lead to this consequence? What is the mediating mechanism that explains that? Or alternatively, what is the moderator? Correct. Okay, so it contextualizes or gives us the contingency factors by which our theory falls down, okay, does not work. So here's a great example. Customer centricity. We would expect that if you're more customer centric as an organisation, that you would actually benefit from long-term financial performance. Yes, that's what the literature says. But indeed, as more and more organisations became customer-centric, they weren't getting the benefits. Why is that? When indeed our theory would suggest the more customer-centric you are, the more you're going to benefit financially. Well, because there's a trade-off, all right? That if you set up an organisation structure by customers, okay, and specialise, yes, you'll increase customer satisfaction, but you'll also increase costs, coordination costs. So it's a trade-off. But this trade-off, therefore, you will only benefit when certain aspects of your competitive environment are in place. So here's our moderators that will determine whether or not you will benefit from higher, in other words, your customer satisfaction will be stronger than the cost. Okay, it's that trade-off. So here's a nice example of the theory qualifier, because our contingency factor, meaning our competitive environment, comes into play about whether or not that theory will hold. Yeah? Okay. Our last theoretical contribution, typology. I kind of like typologies. And I did one myself. I was looking at various types of blood donors because I said to myself, why is it that the Australian Red Cross Blood Service, they have advertisements, but yet it doesn't work for all types of donors? Why is that? And in fact, conceptually, I was able to show that it's because there are different types of donors with different motivations. Yeah? So, typology explains differences of variants of that concept. So think about your phenomenon, your conceptual entity. Does it act the same way? Yes, it could be a moderator, but maybe there's different variants of that entity. And that might help us reconcile our conflicting findings. So if I show you, going back to that literature table, that indeed was their contribution. They were able to show that there's different forms of customer participation. Now, remember how I said to you, don't look at this column here? That's because then they resolved the conflicting findings by showing us that indeed there's 3 types of customer participation. Those in which the customer is necessary, those in which it can be replaced by a service employee, those in which is not even necessary for the service, but the customer does anyway, say supervising a tradesman, right? Not necessary, but it can improve outcomes. So by having a nice simple typology, these authors were able to go back and give a convincing account as to why there was conflicting findings, because indeed not all customer participation is the same.
And that typology, where did it come from? It didn't come from the literature review. It was via a particular method, I'm guessing.
Because they looked at, they conceptually, they came up with, okay, how can we resolve that? And then going back to having knowledge of when it's, for example, not positive, it's a negative outcome. Why is that? Well, it may be because it could be substituted by an employee. In other words, it wasn't required of the customer to participate. Maybe the customer was indeed. So you'd have to have a good idea about how can I make this work. Let me focus in on those negative examples. What's the pattern? Because what you have to be really good at is detecting patterns. Yeah? And so what's the pattern behind all these studies that had a negative outcome? What's the pattern behind all the studies that had a positive outcome? What is the pattern behind all those studies that had a non-significant outcome?
This is a result of a literature review, synthesis of a literature.
Basically, and then they also did some empirical work. So they've, this is the conceptual paper, as you can see, and which gets an enormous amount of sites. But then obviously now everyone has to differentiate between the different types of customer participation from then on, so that everyone is on the same page about when they talk about customer participation, what type they're talking about. So yes, this is a best case scenario where you have a conceptual paper, everyone agrees on it, and then you go ahead and do some empirical work, which they did as a follow-up. Yeah, that's a best case scenario. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is consider your current research project. Just think about one. What is your phenomenon, conceptual entity of interest? We've all got one. Okay. And understand, going back to those 6 contributions, which one do you think you've adopted? Okay. And how, and this is really important, even after you've written the paper, ask yourself, how have researchers, what do they think about study or explain the phenomenon? How does it change? All right, by reading my paper, how do people see this phenomenon? What is different that you've contributed to the knowledge? All right, so this template, and I haven't invented this template. I got it from a very famous management scholar. I've adapted it somewhat. Cynthia Harding, I don't know if you've come across her work. She's retired now. But like I said, this is pretty hard to do. And different people have different approaches, but I think this approach is quite helpful, well, at least to me. So what I'd like you to do, and I'll give you an example, is that there will be, and obviously, if you're targeting a particular journal, you've got to make sure that you've engaged in the literature about that conceptual entity from that journal, because that would be suicide if you didn't. But not necessarily. I mean, all you have to do is make sure that you're engaging with some key references concerning that conceptual entity. So what I want you to do, and a good rule of thumb is to have at least 3 contributions, conceptual contributions. All right. Now, if you can only manage one, so be it. Make it good. But so I just want to give you an example. This is a special request. Do you make special requests of frontline staff? All right, give me an example.
On a Christmas party.
Okay, so you might say, I need the table by the window, or whatever it might be. Okay, so that could be an example of the special request. I'm sure we all make special requests. Now, this particular, I guess the most cited in a particular journal, okay, said that basically special requests was only prompted by customers having resource deficiency. In other words, they have a need, right? Now, my findings find that, in fact, it's more than just needs. There's wants, and then there's customers that like to test the boundary. In other words, they're a bit cheeky. They might ask for a discount or a deal or a date, okay, or something really naughty, but they're pushing the boundaries somewhat, okay? So that's my empirical findings. And this is going to help you now, because at worst, if you can't go up this further level of abstraction, this is key, all right, getting to that higher level of abstraction, because ultimately, what do you need to do? You need to try and generalize your findings, don't you? But this is hard to do. So how do I now abstract that to a higher level? Well, by the fact that there's different motives, that means there's going to be different outcomes if I say no to you as a frontline staff member, if you were testing boundaries compared to whether you were in need or simply wanted, okay, because you desired that special request. So that's my contribution. Right? So like I said, that's challenging. In fact, I work with someone who gets, journal marketing articles every year, and he always says to his students, engage in the literature. Who are you contributing to? Then what are your findings? Don't talk about aims, talk about your findings. And then what is your managerial implications, right, for every single contribution? So like I said, there's other approaches to this. This is a Cynthia Harding approach. I think it's the best approach, but it's tough to do. because these two are easy. You can identify who you're engaging with, what literature, but be focused and write about it. Right? But this part is quite hard.
So Liliana, one of the things that I've seen through the, editorial process is people repeat their findings in the discussion because they can't see the difference.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give people from moving from your findings to the discussion in a journal article based on?
I think you have to, with the discussion, you have to go back to your research questions that you've articulated in the introduction. So people want to see that you've answered those questions. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say this approach might help by actually putting it on the template first. That will stop you from meandering. All right. But here's another example. It might help a little bit more as well. So again, influence tactics. So I'm not just making a special request, but I'm using tactics to get my way. What do you think are some of the tactics you could use? Or what have you used? Smiling. Okay, smiling, being overly nice. How was your day? Oh, you poor things, So empathy, maybe smiling, being polite. What are some of the other tactics that you've seen customers use?
Looking like he might go somewhere else.
Okay, yeah, all right. So you might use some coercive strategies, all right? Threatening that you're going to go elsewhere if you don't get your way. That you spend a lot of money at this business, therefore you want whatever you want, okay? So indeed, now I've been told I have to cut down this 25, right? But we identify, see, the fact is, right, in the literature, you could see these influence tactics used by sellers on buyers, so salespeople, and you see them on perhaps also, again, in the sales kind of context, but no one's done it for customers. So what are the influence tactics at customers? So having a typology, that's the contribution. But, again, remember how I said you can be the first? How can I abstract this? Well, again, it was a bit hard other than saying I'm the first to document this, but also, therefore, what can I see from this? That indeed customers use a lot of coercive ones because of that power dynamics. Because the majority of people that accept special requests tend to be low-paid frontline staff.
Thank you very much for this. This is really a lovely, and I don't know if we're going to get to this in a second, but I fear a tactic that a lot of us use in, say, political theory.
Okay, great.
If we get to column C,
Yeah.
one of the easiest ways of getting that done is to socialize it. So
Great.
bringing your papers forward at in-house seminars, putting your ideas up on the whiteboard.
Brilliant. Yeah.
With your trusted people.
Yeah.
Just talk it through.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's some supervisors that say, don't share your good ideas out there. Someone will steal it. I know I work with some of those supervisors, but I'm not. I'm saying, yes, go in and socialize it. You're absolutely right. And then that will give you that higher order abstraction that you're looking for. I'll just give you the last one. Remember, try and go for 3 if you can, all right? Particularly if you're dealing with a good quality journal. So we're talking about influence tactics. Someone did mention interaction styles. How have I looked at this? In fact, I've brought in a particular theory and shown again that it affects how you're asking your request affects my judgment on the reasonableness of your request. So it's not only about the request, but how you've approached the request. And then I just say, basically, it qualifies this particular theory by showing that even though it might be the same special request, how I've actually asked that special request influences the outcomes for the actual frontline who's assessing that request. And that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's intuitively sensible. Okay, so Before you do your own, and I think we've nearly run out of time.
You're good, you're really.
Okay. Contributions, don't overreach. What do you think I mean by that? Yeah. What I find in discussions in particular, people are like going beyond their findings. So be very careful about that, all right? So, yeah, don't overreach your findings in your extrapolations. Don't just read what Rebecca was saying, don't just rehash your findings. That's not your contribution, all right? You need to take that higher level of abstraction, or at least compare it to how does it compare with the existing knowledge that we have. That's why you need to be focused about that 1 to 5 key articles that you're leveraging from. Right? Be focused. Don't lose track of that narrative, that dialogue. Meander, okay? Keep your research questions in focus. Okay, just some general recommendations, particularly if you're more of an empirical, positivist researcher. Study dependent variables that matter to business practitioners. I know that you're not all business, but that matter to your target market, to your cohort. Study independent variables that can be modified. Okay, it's no point somewhat looking at, or particularly in business, variables that you can't modify, like customer characteristics or demographics, etc. And consider and test for alternative plausible explanations, and if not, at least include them as control variables, so that you know that your effects are real and not driven by some unaccountable variable. Okay, and there's just the references by which this presentation has been drawn from, but we've all got copies. So I don't know if we've got, 5 minutes?
Now,
Half an hour.
Half an hour.
yeah, because we started early.
Okay, good. Sorry. All right. So what about if we use this time now that you have a go at doing this with a key paper that you have, a key conceptual entity. So I'll give you 10 minutes to do that, and then we can pair up and see how convincing you are. And then hopefully we get a few people to share. So can we do that? Great. Yes.
2 questions I have, please.
Yes, and questions. Yes.
One is, I know we're told before that your literature is current. So, it's writing something that was done in anything probably. But sometimes the key papers,
The seminal papers.
are older, but they're still so powerful and nothing's replaced that. Is that okay, or should you be looking for
Well, I think with the theories themselves, if you're applying a particular theory or qualifying a theory, you need to cite those original papers. You have to, right? But in terms of more recent, I think that literature table needs to be up to date. Unless you articulate that you're confining only this literature from your discipline, all right? That might be another way about it. So we might say we're only looking at marketing papers, or we're only looking at papers in the top marketing journals. So unless you qualify it, but it's still expected to be current. So the literature table current, the theory from the original seminal sources.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My next question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Do you have any particular advice for qualitative researchers? Because I'm trying to be a qualitative researcher and my impression is that the quantitative approaches seem easier to follow and understand.
It's more structured, but then the qualitative researchers, you need to know who your tribe is because they have different approaches as well. So, for example, I'll give you a classic example here. I work with on one paper with perhaps one of our best qualitative researchers, Diani Scaramboto. I don't know if you've come across her name. And she has a particular way that is a JCR, so a particular style of journal, way of doing the qualitative research. We followed that, went to Journal of Service Research, and they said, no, we want the Goya method. Okay. And she said, that's so out of date, but you need to know who your tribe is. So it depends on the journal. So what I would, whatever your target journal is, look at how the qualitative researchers, what they've adopted. So I've done some horrible stuff with qualitative research only because the journal wanted it. Like, say, some of the social science, blood donation type journals, they wanted me to count, right? Count how many informants said a particular theme. So that's not on, right? But I had to do it with the journal. So you need to know the journal and what method they like or structured in terms of presenting the results. That's the only advice I can give you, because here's a great example. Someone who's on top of a game with qualitative research got rejected at JSR because they didn't like her style.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you for the very interesting and insightful presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question here, like how do you identify authentic new topics to go on? Because like, sometimes I have to refer to the news. For example, one of my projects was from the news. After
Yes.
seeing the news, I thought it could be a
Yes.
topic.
Yes.
But sometimes it's a bit difficult to identify authentic topics to go on because it's very competitive.
People watch.
Okay.
Yeah, so the news is a great way. So I always say to myself, I'm going to read the Australian Financial Review and I get ideas, right? If you do that religiously, or just observing what happens. How do you get Rebecca's always good at getting new ideas. I mean, or Rochelle, or all of you.
Yeah, it's a bit of a combination of stuff, but I try and stay in my lane as well. Like there can be some great new ideas out there, but if it's not in my field, then I have to really go, do I really want to start a new field of research? So sometimes I get it because I get the shits with an article. And that is like, right. You know, interestingly, I did publish something recently critiquing that, and then a very, very senior academic who then took it upon himself to write a commentary piece, particularly back at me in the journal that I was formerly an editor at. So I've been invited to do a rejoinder on that. But, you know, sometimes you've got to pick your battles. But so I do that when something gets me really worked up. I'm like, okay, I can have a whinge to my colleagues, or I can actually do an article on it. For me, sometimes it's an industry partner has a really big problem. But for me, the cool stuff is, I read a book or I see something in the media and go, that is, you get like the little brain tingles and go, I want to know more about that. So I do scan, I read stuff, I read really eclectic articles, I read everything from political theory through to Greek philosophy. Something will spark. And I've got a little notebook that I write stuff down. That's my, topics for honours students kind of book. And eventually, I come back. So I scan constantly.
Yeah. I'll give you a great example. During COVID, I walked into a supermarket, and you know how we're all so paranoid about cleanliness and safety. And I thought to myself, oh, look at all these new things that the supermarket's doing now. What I should write a paper about signals. And looked, and I did a scan to see if anyone else had done signals of safety. They did it on quality, but not on safety. And that little paper, which seriously only took me maybe 3 weeks to write with a colleague, it's got over 100 citations. So it keeps getting used. So sometimes it's as simple as observing around you what's going on and asking the question, and then doing the search maybe now on AI to see if anyone else has done it.
Yeah, I would say just
just be curious, be looking around you, thinking with your discipline lens. I tell my undergraduate students, always thinking with your discipline lens, and it would be the same for researchers. You know, everywhere we go in our field, we're thinking with our discipline lens and try to sort of say, what could we do here? What could we change? And I know that probably one area of my research that's probably become the most well-known, I was sitting at the airport meeting a colleague who I'd met at a conference about a year before, and we thought, oh, we'll just catch up for a coffee, but the only way we could do it was at the airport. So we were sitting at the airport chatting, and we just started talking about this idea, and I sort of said, what if this happened? And we said, we should write a paper, same sort of thing as your signals one. And we found a special issue. We had to get it done in a month. We, you know, busted our asses to get it done in a month, and then suddenly it's become like probably our most cited paper, and then developed on for a field of research that we're still working on now. So I think, you know, if we hadn't had that conversation at the airport that day, who knows what would have happened, you know, because that had been in the back of my mind for a while, but I hadn't done anything with it. So having that written down in your notebook or whatever, parking those ideas for when you can, but coming back to those ideas, because it's when you have those strange ideas that it could develop into something.
Yeah, and to be honest with my PhD students, I let them do whatever they want because they need the passion, they need the fire in their belly, right? So, and sometimes I don't really know what they're doing, but you know, obviously I'm guiding them, but yeah, so, and sometimes they have the good ideas, or we gauge their good ideas and massage them. All right, so we've got a few, let's go, right? So you must know your literature. So start with that key literature. Oh, there should be some more here. Sorry. Oh, they've run out. Okay, we need some more. Has anyone got any spare printouts? Who's missing? Have you got? Okay, no, of the handouts. Yeah, I've got one. Okay, thank you. Anyone else missing? You're missing?
Yeah, I'm missing.
Oh. Thank you so much.
It's that you.
That's right. That's right, Mark. Just if you contact Rochelle or hey, if they don't have a copy, what can you exchange?
Yogi,
Their slides.
yeah, I'll try.
I don't have them either. But yeah, I can ask.
Yeah, Yogi has a copy, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can get this.
Thank you.
Sorry. I thought we made enough.
She's still working.
No, all right, nice. Thank you for coming.
It's just like always, expectation, no.
I'm eventually going to head, so. I wouldn't hesitate, right?
Which kind of compounds and makes them look worse. People study story diffusion class, which is like a game of. And then they found that like around neurodiversity. I'll have that problem and it's going to be on your.
My name for 3 contributions.
A lot of things that do.
Yeah, and so I am looking at those people, which we consider it, it's meant to be like a there's evidence that the double empathy for that film is acting on the yes. So like you're in a instantly skeptical convey threats that they person jumps in space, it's like you host. So
It's very interesting.
yeah, that's
Like with my observation of line. Even more. Yeah, so cool. Yeah, and you're divergent to getting to that further smaller line.
Yeah.
Of course. Very nice, thank you. Right, so how are we going? It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's a hard thinking of the literature that you want to put in. That's why I'm looking it up.
But like, it's interesting because it's like everything. Like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm interested in doing.
Literature is can be the theory or the one that I always cited. So what I'm doing is actually I'm writing my own findings for this.
That's the key literature in which you,
This is my paper actually. So I was just thinking about it because I always work with that.
is it the best? The only reason why I say that is because at low level literature, so depending on where you're from. All right, so what's your journal target? What's your journal target for you? Where do you hope to publish this? So that's the other thing, guys. I know it's a little bit whatever, but be careful about the literature you're informing, right? So if you're targeting a high-level journal in your discipline, don't base all your contributions based on a low-level journal. Dangerous, because it's discredited. That's just the realities of life, all right? Yep. So think about where you're going to target your research. And obviously try and target it as high as possible. But some projects just don't work out, do they? So you have to be realistic as well.
And then you have to add those lower quality papers somehow, somewhere, squeeze them, and that makes it really difficult. Any contributions and
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes.
Yeah. So it's important for you to understand where you're going to target your thesis, all right, your best contribution, your best paper. And then make sure that you're engaging in the narrative of that journal at least, or at least journals of equivalent ranking. Because if you're going to base it all on lower level journals and you're trying to target a higher level journal, it's just not going to be credible. Right?
And my particular field is very much focused on the Pacific region.
Okay.
So much of the literature is North American. Who cares? Couldn't care less. But that's all the Q1 stuff and all my but I don't want to talk about.
That's fair enough then. At least you've made that decision and that's your target audience, then it doesn't matter, does it?
And yet the university metric is
You want. See what you mean? So that's a gamble for your career, isn't it? Why don't you have a portfolio approach?
the colonial scholar, I think it's called.
Yes, but we've just had a researcher who's done that and they've published in the Journal of Marketing, best journal we have in our discipline on Indigenous knowledge. So there is a way if you make a significant theoretical contribution. So very risky strategy for your career just to go with local journals.
The other thing you'd want to do is, do you want to change the mainstream? Because you can't change the mainstream from the outside. You have to change it from the inside, which is really hard.
Really hard and be a groundbreaker in terms of changing that perception as well.
Yeah.
Because when I started my academic career, everyone said you would never be able to publish Australian data in general marketing. That was the common.
But we have.
And
And social marketing was this fringe, nice stuff. Nobody's interested in that. It's all about dollars. And now all the mainstream top journals are all interested in societal benefits.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, because everyone just kept pushing, saying, societal stuff matters. It's important to look after the environment, to look after people. It matters. And because those people were publishing them in those mainstream journals, it actually changed the narrative in the mainstream journals.
Yeah. Portfolio approach, okay? Okay, anyone want to share? Share their example? Allow us to give you some feedback?
I could share.
Great.
Okay, so I'm from international business and strategy background. So this is a paper that at the moment is being submitted to Strategic Journal of Management.
Yeah.
So SMJ.
That's a nice high-level journal.
Yeah, it's been rejected from AFJ. So next one. So this paper is on the behavioral theory of firm. And the seminal paper is here in March 1963, which is a very old paper. And we're bringing the upper echelon theory to contribute to this. So the recent one was a review done about probabilistic search. For those that don't know, it's basically that performance compared to aspiration triggers search behaviors for organizations.
Search of what?
Search of an activity to avoid that performance decrease, if you like, according to your aspiration, to the organizational aspirations. So what has happened, it has basically been automatized, and it's been said all organizations, when they are below what they would like to be in terms of their aspirations, it triggers search for them, and search could be mergers and acquisitions, R&D, some sort of firm outcome. And it has been ignore the boundary conditions, who makes the decisions, and how they make those decisions. So that's our existing literature. Now, what our summary of our empirical findings are is that we have considered theory qualifier, if I'm right. We're considering who makes the decisions, so the chief executive officer, and what is their motivation behind that, behind this achievement situation, and what they would like to achieve with these different firm outcomes. So we have two different achievement motivations for the executives, and that's whether they are learning oriented or whether they are performance oriented, and how that influences when they trigger SAGE and how they satisfy. So when they stop with that firm outcome, or whether they keep continuing to with the strategy that was triggered by this issue with their aspirations. So, so we have two contributions, not three. So we recognize that CEOs do matter, and that their achievement motivation makes a big impact on the relationship. Their attention to a specific type of performance is what it is aligned according to their motivation. So that's the first contribution. And the second one is that they satisfy differently. So a performance-oriented CEO, when they see reaching aspiration, they stop. Whereas a learning-oriented CEO, they keep going with the approach, and they don't satisfy when they reach to a certain aspirations, as their goals are different for each of them.
Okay.
So I did my best to explain it in a
Yeah.
very good time.
So is that one contribution though? Because it's the CEO, which is pretty obvious, isn't it? That it be the CEO that makes the ultimate decision, but it's their approach that's
Yes, that's the approach.
So
And
it's one contribution, isn't it?
yeah, but the prioritization is actually that there's two types of performance feedback.
Okay.
So that's the first one.
Okay.
So you don't look at both performance feedback and say, if I'm wanting one of them, I'm gonna trigger search.
Okay.
We're saying, well, you look at the one that it interests you and it matches and it aligns with your motivation. So that's how we're looking at.
So what do the rest of you feel?
Yep.
We still don't know if there is any contribution because she didn't talk about the theory. So,
Yeah, you started with the theory. So how has it qualified the theory? How has it qualified the theory that you're basing this behavior of the CEO?
What the theory says. So
Yes,
the behavior.
how have you qualified it?
So the behavioral theory of the firm talks about that firms are not automatic entities, but there's some boundary conditions that affects the way they make decisions. And it's a very, very broad theory in management. So it has very, very specific ties like probabilistic search. So we compare where we are to in terms of a goal, and that will trigger certain types of actions for firms. So that's what the behavioral theory of the firm says. Now, search or probabilistic search is just one part of it, saying when you don't reach your aspirations, the organizations tend to have an action or tend to do an action in order to minimize that loss, if you like. So you expect it to be, I don't know, if you're Apple, you expect it to be above Google, but you're actually below. So what companies do is they do something in order to be on top and in order to be above what they expect it to be. So that's what this specific part of the theory says, of the behavioral theory.
You're building as well as qualifying?
No, I'm just qualifying.
Just qualifying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the
Right.
build has been done
Okay.
by paper 218, so.
Okay. I guess we need to find just a few more if you're going to target that
Yeah.
quite high journal.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to share? Are we got a few more minutes? Anyone else want to share? So you can see it's a tough process, isn't it? It's not easy. Recording findings is pretty easy, but translating those findings into conceptual contributions, that's the challenge. That's going to win it, make or break you in terms of getting through that DES reject. So sometimes even using these terms help as well. Okay. And trying to focus in on going back to those research questions and what theory, particularly if you're taking a positivist approach, not building theory, what are you actually doing to the existing theory that's explaining why the phenomenon or conceptual entity is behaving a particular way in your context, okay? All right, yeah.
Well, Liana, a lot of people are doing bibliometric studies and systematic lit reviews these days. And often just reporting lots of graphs and charts and very descriptive and saying, well, here's the contribution. What advice would you give people about finding a theoretical contribution in those kind of methods?
Yeah, I think just describing actually it really annoys me. So I tend to reject those from psychology and marketing, and they get submitted quite very often because, like I said, the software is available. That sort of stuff, like how many are from what country and a lot of description, should go in a web appendix, right? It's not interesting. If anyone's interested, they can go and look at the supplementary material. So your contribution has to be this organizing framework, which isn't going to come from a computer, all right? It's going to come from you. And so you can either use a theory to help you organize and present a framework for this, for how you're going to present the data. But what's more important is how you're going to inform future research by your organizing framework. So that's where the contribution is. But so many times all we see is description. All right, what journals, what's the themes, boring.
Clusters.
Okay, DES reject.
No, so what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just description, and it's very past looking as well. Okay, it's explaining what's happened in the past, but doesn't inform the future.
And the other problem is sometimes there is a future agenda, but it's not directly related to what has been come out of the synthesis. And that disconnect is no good either.
Kind of, I guess, going back to my question about the date of papers, there's one paper in particular that was published 10 years ago and set out a whole lot of future research possibilities. And people have only really scratched the surface of what's been done since that was published 10 years ago, I think. But I guess I'm wondering, well, 10 years ago saying we need more research on this is not enough.
Don't put that in. It's dated straight away. If you write a call has been made and then you cite someone 10 years ago, it's out of date. Right? That's a red flag for me.
Unless the issue is still current and it's been gone unaddressed, but you'd have to demonstrate that.
Yeah. Pretty hard.
Maybe it's not done
It's
because
hard to demonstrate an absence of in that.
Not really. Do your literature table show the absence? So, for example, I was able to show that no one's looked at customer influence tactics. So by showing the literature table that when I had a column, employee factors, organizational factors, customer factors, and that was all blank. And that is really nice because it shows the reviewer that indeed from all the literature, no one's investigated this. So obvious, it's visual.
Yeah.
So that's how you can do it.
Thank you.
That's why you've got to be clever about how you're going to use that literature table to help you convince the reviewer that indeed you're working on an important topic. All right, any other questions, queries, want to share? No? Okay. Right, so thank you.
So that was fabulous. I learned so much and I'm sure everyone here did. So thank you to Professor Liliana Bove. And we do have a bottle of wine as a thank you. It's a local wine from Cherry Tree Hill Winery. So beautiful.
Thank you so much. That's very generous.
Enjoy that. Liliana will be joining us for morning tea. So I think morning tea is happening now. And so I'm sure that if you have further questions or comments about your discipline, you can speak to Liliana. Back here at 11.
you started early.
No worries. Sorry.
Did work well, yeah. Really good.